Wait, who did you want me to call? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 1984 supernatural comedy, Ghostbusters. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of the extra content. Ghostbusters stars Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis, and was directed by Ivan Reitman. It tells the story of a trio of newly unemployed parapsychologists who decide to start a ghost-catching business only to find themselves facing a much larger supernatural threat. What a weird movie. I like this film, and I have since I was a kid, but there's no denying that this is a bizarre movie. I'll never quite understand how this film became such a cultural phenomenon. This is one of those rare movies that everybody knows. Most people have seen it, but because it's so ingrained in pop culture, even those who haven't watched it know what it is. They know the tagline, they can sing the theme song, they can recognize the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Nearly 40 years after its release, you'd be hard-pressed to find somebody who's never heard of Ghostbusters. But when you really think about it, and really think about this movie, the fact that it is so ubiquitous is baffling. This is a film about an eccentric trio of geeky scientists who start a paranormal investigation business and deal with ghosts, apocalyptic gods, and interdimensional portals. That doesn't really sound that weird by today's film standards, or by today's general embrace and acceptance of nerd culture, but when this film came out, none of that was typical of a big blockbuster movie. And then on top of that, you throw in the campiness, the odd tonal and genre blend, and the seemingly dichotomous nature of the film's target audience. Looking back on the film and taking all of that into context, Ghostbusters seems more like a movie that was destined to become a cult favorite, not a mainstream hit. But apparently the oddity of this film struck a chord with general audiences in 1984, just as it did with me about a decade later. Ever since I was a kid, I had been pretty interested in paranormal investigation. And when I was older, in high school and even early college, my friend and I used to go ghost hunting. We had my old mini DV camcorder, microphones, a digital thermometer, an EMF meter, the whole thing. And we used to go investigate in cemeteries, old buildings, you name it. We did get a few spooky and inexplicable readings and images over the years, but I can tell you we never saw a Class 7 full torso floating manifestation. I'm not sure if that interest in ghost hunting was because of this movie, or if I liked this movie because I had that pre-existing interest, but it's certainly been a factor in my continued return to the film. And it's also been a factor in determining my favorite parts of this film. I've always loved the actual ghost busting, when they're going around to all these small-time haunting jobs. It's just so fun to see them in action, to see them use the proton packs and the ghost traps, to listen to Spengler's technical talk, even some of the more mundane aspects of the ghost-busting business, like how the ghost storage system works. I find it all so interesting, and I honestly would have loved if this movie had just focused on the day-to-day operations of the Ghostbusters. So, the first half of this film is especially fun for me. It's briskly paced, and we get a nice quick introduction to the supernatural elements of this Ghostbusters world before moving on to the inception of the team, how their equipment works, Ecto-1, headquarters, their first few jobs, but then everything shifts. And while the whole Zool Gozer plotline ultimately leads to a memorable finale and provides a reason for the ever-wonderful Sigourney Weaver to be in the movie, I can't help but feel like it's the big weak spot of the story. I know part of the joke of it all is that the Ghostbusters are wildly ill-prepared and ill-equipped to take on a godlike supernatural entity, but it's such a huge jump from Slimer or the Ghost Librarian, and the apocalyptic escalation of it all just feels like too much. Not only that, but the build-up and everything that's needed to set the stage for the whole Gozer thing just takes way too long and really messes with the pacing. What starts as a fairly brisk moving film, with the occasional overlong scene, screeches to a halt close to the halfway point of the movie. The EPA subplot kicks off the sluggishness, but the plot becomes exceptionally stagnant after the initial excitement of the Keymaster Gatekeeper thing, and it doesn't really pick up again until the rooftop sequence. Luckily, the characters and performances managed to keep this entertaining even during some of the most dragged out sections of the story. Bill Murray's sardonic Venkman, Dan Aykroyd's happy-go-lucky stance, Harold Ramis's stiffly serious Spengler, and Ernie Hudson's comparatively normal Xenomorph to round out the team. But then you've got the strong supporting cast too. Sigourney Weaver as Dana, with some very entertaining reactions to things, and interactions with both Venkman and her neighbor Lewis. Speaking of Lewis, we've got Rick Moranis in one of his most memorable and most annoying roles. And we can't forget about possibly my favorite Ghostbusters character, Janine, brought to sarcastic life by Annie Potts. Although the script had some trouble with pacing and a few iffy plot decisions, the dialogue of Ghostbusters is great. Not every joke lands, but even some of the lesser comedic moments work because of their delivery. Very little is actually delivered as a punchline. Most of it's either some ridiculous line said with entertaining earnestness, or sarcastically delivered under somebody's breath. Bill Murray plays his typical sarcastically deadpan and unfazed character, but it really works here, and this film is absolutely loaded with memorable and quotable lines. So that all brings us back to this topic of Ghostbusters' bizarre cultural phenom status. I think this is a film that has a lot of really excellent pieces that come together to make an okay whole. But the strength of those individual pieces is what sustains it, and what I think catapulted it to the level it's at. It's a film whose legacy ultimately overshadows and masks its flaws. The memorable iconography is what stands out in people's minds and memories. The theme song, the tagline and logo, the look and sound of the Ectomobile, the jumpsuits and proton packs, Slimer, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Even though they're only pieces of what this movie actually is, they're the things that stick with you and influence your feelings on the film long after the bizarre nuances of the plot start to fade. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is easily the premise. It's amazing that it was so well received by audiences in 1984. But for me, there's always been something so fun about watching this eccentric and mismatched team of scientists ghost hunt their way through New York City. It's presented in such a comically offbeat way, but even though it's funny, and it is a comedy, the story is taken seriously. It goes to some weird places with all of the Zool and Gozer stuff, but the concept of the Ghostbusters business is never really scoffed at. It's kind of just accepted as an atypical but completely reasonable business to get into, and only one character ever questions the legitimacy of what's going on. Everybody else in this world of Ghostbusters just knows that ghosts are real, and accepts that a group of weird guys driving around in a converted 50s ambulance can catch them. The second pro has gotta be the dialogue. This movie has so many memorable lines and is exceptionally quotable, but even the dialogue that's never really made it into the pop culture lexicon is extremely entertaining. It's funny without being obnoxious about it, and is full of these great one-liners and moments of banter that play so quickly that it takes a second for your brain to register the joke, if you even caught it at all. The script definitely had a big hand in this great dialogue, but it wouldn't have been nearly as memorable without the delivery. On the con side, the biggest issue has gotta be the pacing in the second half. Things slow down so much, and we get a lot of scenes that are unnecessarily long or just plain unnecessary. For the most part, this sluggish section of the film has moments that do a purpose for the plot. A lot of it is set up for the finale. They need to establish and explain what Gozer is. They need to tie the character of Dana into everything. They need to set up a few minor challenges and inconveniences for the Ghostbusters to overcome before their big task. So, in terms of the plot, this section makes sense and has purpose, but it just drags on, and I gotta admit, I always get a little impatient with it. By the time that meeting with the mayor happens, my attention always starts to wander a bit, and it's not until the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man that I get fully sucked back in again. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Ghostbusters or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Ghostbusters 4 out of 5 paws. This is a rating I always go back and forth on, because like I explained in the review, I know that the pieces of this movie that I really like skew my opinion of the whole. So this is probably really more of a 3.5 paw film, but the fun paranormal premise, entertaining characters and dialogue, and let's be honest, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man bump it up that extra half a paw for me. I would recommend Ghostbusters to anybody looking for a solid 80s comedy. It's not just a comedy, also incorporating sci-fi, action, romance, and even moments of pretty legitimate horror, but the comedy is what really comes through here. This is a must-see if you're a Bill Murray fan, and somehow haven't yet seen this, and it's also one of those movies that I think everybody should see at least once, if only for the pop culture understanding. If you liked Ghostbusters, I would recommend Poltergeist. It's another film that deals with ghosts and multiple dimensions, and although it's not a comedy, it does have this sort of bizarre Amblin tone that gives the impression that it's a bit more family-friendly than it actually is. If you like the idea of a sci-fi comedy featuring a team running around New York City capturing supernatural beings, you might want to watch Men in Black. Rather than ghosts, Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones are busting extraterrestrials. And if you enjoyed Bill Murray's performance here and want another sci-fi comedy, you've got to check out Groundhog Day. There aren't any ghosts, but it's another film written by Harold Ramis, and this time also directed by him, that features Bill Murray playing a character with a somewhat familiar personality. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Ghostbusters? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, who are you gonna call? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe if you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies. The way life should be.